Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is that Christians are under threat in the Middle East, especially by ISIS. ISIS is playing a new game. Not only is ISIS using social media for its ability to boost recruitment and incite terror, but now it is also using video to strut its stuff and get its message across. A prime example is a newly released ISIS production documenting its horrors in Egypt. The 20-minute-long video produced by ISIS of Egypt contains footage of the destruction and murder perpetrated by ISIS in a Christian church in Egypt during December 2016. In the course of the attack, about 30 people were murdered and dozens of Egyptian Christians were wounded, most of them women and children. In the video, an ISIS proudly announces that their favorite prey is Christians. The terrorist who is featured in this video is called al-Musri. That's not his name, it's a pseudonym. It's as if he's being called the ISIS everyman. Al-Musri simply means in Arabic, the Egyptian, or of Egypt. This ISIS video has received more coverage than did the original attack, and even then, coverage has been relatively scarce. But don't be surprised. ISIS and other murderous Muslims have massacred Christians on many occasions, and time and again the world has remained relatively silent. There is an intrinsic hatred of Christians in the Middle East, especially when those Christians are successful and emerge from relative obscurity and occupy enviable positions in the social and financial strata of their communities. And there is an intrinsic disregard of Egyptian Christians by the greater Christian world, because these Christians are Coptic Christians. Copts are not connected to either the Vatican or any other Western church. They look and act differently. They do not genuflect toward the West. They have their own pope in Egypt. The Coptic Church of Egypt is one of a series of national churches, or as they are sometimes called, Eastern churches. They are local, and few people in the world are interested enough in their welfare or even in their deaths by massacre to stand up and speak out for them. The Vatican has been relatively quiet, as have many leaders from almost every other Christian denomination. And if little was said, even less was done. That all works to the benefit of ISIS. Christians are an important tool for ISIS, especially Christians of Egypt. They have been perfect targets, and now they've also become primary vehicles for recruitment. This video, much like a video ISIS posted in 2015 after decapitating 21 Coptic Christians and massacre it documents, and all the other attacks ISIS has perpetrated against Coptic Christians have taken place in an environment that is ripe with anti-Christian sentiment. There is a long history of Christian persecution in Egypt. President el-Sisi of Egypt has said the right things, and he has symbolically even paid visits to his Christian community during their festivals. But he has yet to bring the force of Egypt's police and army to the defense of the churches and communities, either in the aftermath of the attacks or in advance of future impending massacres. Rural farming areas of Egypt are especially at risk. There are between 9 to 10 million Copts in Egypt. They're about 10% of the total population and are the largest Christian community in the entire Middle East. Their churches have been burned down, blown up, and people in the communities have been terrorized. ISIS is capitalizing on an already fertile anti-Christian sentiment. This is a new surge of anti-Christian attacks, and its documentation via social media is geared to recruit local Egyptians into the ISIS fold. Attacks on Coptic Christians send the message to all Christian-hating Muslims in Egypt that ISIS is in tandem with them. ISIS is saying, we think alike, come and join our mission. This is why it is so important for President el-Sisi to act against ISIS and against the anti-Christian terror invading his country. The attack in December and the interest raised by the video undoubtedly succeeded in garnering more positive attitudes from potential followers. ISIS exudes confidence in the video. They are so confident of their ability in both recruitment and terrorist activities that ISIS is spreading its wings in all directions. Until recently, ISIS only periodically struck the major cities of Egypt. They were content with their turf in the Sinai desert. From there, they trained and recruited and struck the Egyptian army targets and ferreted out spies. It was in the Egyptian Sinai that ISIS downed a Russian plane packed with tourists. Now ISIS activity is escalating and quickly. They even have launched a set of rockets into Israel toward the southern Israeli city of Eilat. Those rockets were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome, their anti-missile batteries. But most significant, and this is a huge change, is that we learn this from the video. ISIS is calling themselves by a new name. Until now, they had only been called the ISIS of the Sinai Peninsula. The name used in the video is the ISIS of Egypt. For very good reasons, Christians fear for their lives in certain parts of the Middle East. ISIS has called them their primary target and their favorite prey. And still, the plight and the tragedy of Middle East Christians goes relatively unnoticed by the larger Christian and Western world. Remember, the Christian community in Egypt numbers about 9 million. It's the largest Christian community in the Middle East, and ISIS has hit them very hard. They date themselves back to St. Mark in Alexandria, during the period of the Roman Emperor Claudius, at about the time of 42 CE, just after the death of Jesus. Copts call themselves Christians of Egypt. They are arguably the oldest Christian community in the world. When about 30 Egyptian Copts, mostly women and children, were massacred, and many more were wounded in their church by ISIS, AP and Reuters, and only a handful of media in the world, covered the terror attacks by running wire releases. Even fewer media outlets made more than a casual mention of the atrocities and persecution of Christians in the Middle East. The events befalling the Christian community in Egypt are not simply newsworthy. They are an essential tool with which to elucidate the fragile status of a minority community in the Middle East. Christians among Muslims, these persecutions are important tools in measuring the activities of Arab governments and their responses to the challenge. Jewish and Israeli media standing up and calling attention to the plight of Christians living under the Muslim regime and being murdered by ISIS while worldwide Christian leadership remains silent smacks only a slight touch of irony. We need to prevent the oppression of minorities, and we know the importance of defending those who cannot defend themselves. And while there are those in the Arabic world who say that the Jews are exaggerating these atrocities only to make these Muslim regimes look bad, I say poppycock. When extremist groups like ISIS are freely murdering, it becomes big news in Israel. The most obvious reason is because Israel may be next, because Israel, as the world should know, is on the front line. Over the past few weeks, ISIS has produced and posted a hit list of Christians they're going to murder. So far, ISIS has murdered 7 people on that hit list. 1 beheaded, another was burnt alive. A father and son, members of the Hanuk family, were dumped on the side of the road after ISIS shot the father dead and burned his son alive. The symbolism should not be lost. In Islam, the symbol of dumping a dead body on the side of a road outside of a town, in this case the town was Al-Arish, is very telling. It means the victims are seen by their murderers as unfit for human burial, and instead worthy only of being thrown to the dogs to be mauled and eaten. The victims are seen by the murderers as subhuman, and that is the way ISIS views all Christians, but most of all, the Christians of the Middle East. Many Christians are fleeing the Sinai where these attacks have taken place. They've seen the writing on the wall and heard the promise of future threats. Egyptian President al-Sisi condemned the recent attacks, much in the same way he condemned the December massacre. But that's all he's done. Little else has happened, and Christians rightfully fear for their lives. Despite the AP and Reuters coverage of the persecutions, the massacres of Christians in the Middle East has barely made a blip on the radar of the Western news media. Al-Sisi is reacting much the way the Western media is reacting. The Copts are not part of the mainstream. They don't belong. Their tradition and their practice looks nothing like Western Christianity. They are not significant populations. They're not existent outside of Egypt to take up the battle cry and to defend them. Libya and Sudan have small Coptic communities, but they're not going to make waves. and risk their relative safety to help out in Egypt. Western Catholic and Protestant groups are not connected to these Christians who are part of the Eastern Church, and as I said, that's sometimes referred to as the national churches. That leaves Israel and Jews around the world. Defense of Egypt's Christian community is not purely selfless. We have, as they say, flesh in the game. We must call attention to the plight of Christians under ISIS and other oppressors in order to make certain that moderate regimes in the region remain stable and in power. Egypt must protect the Christians and destroy ISIS because otherwise ISIS will destabilize the entire country as well as the region. Remember, ISIS is recruiting members to help oppress the Christians. Protecting Christians will protect the region. Ultimately, it will protect Israel too. Coming up next, Points of View. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I want to discuss one column and one speech today. The column is from the Jerusalem Post, and it's written by Caroline Glick. It was published on February 28, 2017. As a note of full disclosure, Caroline's column is right next to mine on the front page of the Jerusalem Post, published online February 27th. Caroline is an engaging writer. She pushes people's buttons and often sounds the battle cry on issues that energizes many readers to act and organize. She's one of those writers people either love or love to hate. This column is entitled Our World, Peres, Ellison, and the Meaning of Anti-Semitism. The essay deals with the Democratic Party and their election of the leader of the National Committee. She asserts that the Democrats are in a dangerous place for themselves, for the U.S., and for the American Jewish community. This is how Glick begins her column. Was former Secretary of Labor and Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez's victory over Congressman Keith Ellison over the weekend in the race to serve as the new chairman of the Democratic National Committee a victory of centrist Democrats over radical leftists in the party? That's how the mainstream media is portraying Perez's victory. Along these lines, Professor Alan Dershowitz, a lifelong Democrat who promised to quit the party if Ellison was elected due to his documented history of anti-Semitism and hostility towards Israel, hailed Perez's election. Speaking to Fox News, Dershowitz said that Perez's election over Ellison is a victory in the war against bigotry, anti-Semitism, the anti-Israel push of the hard left within the Democratic Party. Glick now continues her analysis by showing that Dershowitz is wrong, and there is little distance between Ellison and Perez. She writes, there are two problems with Dershowitz's view. First, Perez barely won. Ellison received nearly half the votes in the 2 rounds of voting. Tipping his hat to Ellison, massive popularity among the party's leadership and grassroots, Perez appointed the former Nation of Islam spokesman to serve as deputy DNC chairman as soon as his victory was announced. Now Glick shows the second reason. She says there's very little difference between the two. Glick continues, there is a good reason that Perez is so willing to cooperate with Ellison in running the DNC, and this points to the second problem with the claim that Perez's election signals a move toward the center by Democratic leaders. Perez is ready to cooperate with Ellison because the two men have the same ideological worldview and the same vision for the Democratic Party. Far from being a victory for the centrist forces in the party, Perez's win marks the solidification of the far left's control over the party of Harry Truman. Only hard leftists participated in a meaningful way in the race for leadership of the second largest party in America, a party that less than a decade ago controlled the White House and both houses of Congress. Glick then illustrates many examples of anti-Semitism coming out of the Democratic Party and the justification and explanations of it from various sources, especially from Linda Sarsour and Keith Ellison, who seem clearly to support anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activity. Glick concludes with this powerful statement. The Democrats are in a dangerous place for themselves, for the U.S., and for the American Jewish community. They will not move back to the center if standards for judging what it means to be anti-Semitic are lowered. The only chance that they will return to their senses is if they are made to choose between the Sarsours of the world and the Dershowitzes. And this cannot happen by looking for a consensus on what anti-Semitism means. It can only be done if it can be done at all by drawing a line and demanding that it be respected. Next up, a speech by Bernie Sanders from February 27, 2017. He's addressing the National J Street Convention in the National Convention Center in D.C. Sanders is at his best in this speech. He attacks anti-Semitism, he attacks Israel, he attacks the establishment, and of course, he attacks President Trump too. He begins. Thank you for inviting me to address you here today. It's a pleasure to be here with J Street, which has been such a strong voice for saner, more progressive foreign policy ideas. And I'm delighted to be in the company of friends from the Middle East and all over the world who I know will continue the struggle for a world of peace, justice, and environmental sanity. Now Sanders hits President Trump. He suggests the cause and effect that President Trump has created since the election. Let me begin by noting that in the past several months since Donald Trump's victory in the presidential race, there has been a significant outbreak of anti-Semitism here in our country. I am very alarmed by the desecration of Jewish cemeteries, with Jewish community centers being threatened around the country, and with the headquarters of the Anti-Defamation League receiving a bomb threat last week. Now Sanders calls on his Jewish roots and his time in Israel as a credential for his upcoming criticism of Israel. Now, as many of you know, I have a connection to the state of Israel going back many years. In 1963, I lived on a kibbutz near Haifa. It was there that I saw and experienced for myself many of the progressive values upon which the state of Israel was founded. I think it's very important for everyone, but particularly for progressives, to acknowledge the enormous achievement of establishing a democratic homeland for the Jewish people after centuries of displacement and persecution, and particularly after the horror of the Holocaust. But as you all know, there was another side to the story of Israel's creation, a more painful side. Like our own country, the founding of Israel involved the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people already living there, the Palestinian people. Over 700,000 people were made refugees. Finally, Sanders ends by saying security is necessary for both Israelis and for Palestinians. He says, as I said during my presidential campaign, peace means security not only for every Israeli, but also for every Palestinian. It means supporting self-determination, civil rights, economic well-being for both peoples. Sanders says that racism must be condemned by all sides. America believes in inclusiveness. Here Sanders says, these ideas are based in the very same shared values that impel us to condemn anti-Semitic bigotry, condemn anti-Muslim bigotry, and to make our own society better. These are the ideas that should guide us. The values of inclusiveness, security, democracy, and justice should inform not only America's engagement with Israel and Palestine, but with the region and the world. The United States will continue its unwavering commitment to the safety of the State of Israel. But we must also be clear that peacefully resolving this conflict is the best way to ensure the long-term safety of both peoples and for making America more secure. Now, Sanders reaches out to his Israeli friends to say we need to work together. To my Israeli friends here with us today, we share many of the same challenges. In both our countries, we see the rise of politics of bigotry and intolerance and resentment. We must meet these challenges together. As you struggle to make your society better, more just, more egalitarian, I want to say to you, your fight is our fight. Sanders conveys an important point of view that many American Jews embrace. It is essential that everyone watching this show understand that whatever you think about Sanders, he represents a very large swath of American Jewry. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. Let's look at 3 cartoons today. 2 by Yaakov Kirshen, who is Dry Bones, or actually draws Dry Bones, which is published in the Jerusalem Post. Both were posted on February 27, 2017. The first cartoon is called Hillary's Oscar Dream. It makes fun of the misannouncement of the Best Picture award during the Oscars. Imagine Hillary is on the couch and she's describing her dream to her psychiatrist. She says, and then suddenly a guy ran on stage saying the wrong winner had been announced. This is very funny and yet very true. To this day, many supporters of Hillary believe exactly that the wrong winner was announced. The next cartoon, also by Yaakov Kirshen, is entitled Media Attacks Trump Windmill. The media is on a horse with a lance, and the horse and rider, representing the media, is tilting at a Trump windmill, a windmill with Trump's blonde hair. The obvious message is the media is wasting its time. There is no way to effectively joust against the windmill. Finally, this final cartoon is by A.F. Branco. It's published in Legal Insurrection on February 16, 2017, and can be seen at www.legalinsurrection.com. The cartoon portrays the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu. Their handshake creates a heart, and their cufflinks are their respective flags. Above the hands are the letters BFF, which stands, of course, for Best Friends Forever. Below the hands is the word again. The sentiment is that the U.S. and Israel are once again very close, best friends again. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. As we have seen over the past few years, youth from all over the world have run away to join ISIS. Conservative numbers put the figures at 4,000 youth, but real numbers may be as many as 3 times that. Recently, London police arrested 5 teenagers between 15 and 19 years old. The teens have been charged with terrorism and with traveling to join a terrorist organization. The plan was to travel to Syria and join ISIS. Police raided the houses of the teens to seize their computers, phones, and other materials as evidence. The British press is exploding with this story. People are in shock, just as they were in 2015, when 3 girls, teenage girls, disappeared to join ISIS. The supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, announced on his website that the Palestinians should fight to create their state and destroy Israel. He said that by fighting, they will achieve their ends, but he never called Israel by her name. Instead, the supreme leader called Israel a cancerous tumor. He said that, quote, by Allah's permission, we will see that this intifada will begin a very important chapter in the history of fighting, and that it will inflict another defeat on that usurping regime, unquote. About the Palestinians, Khamenei said, quote, the Palestinian intifada continues to gallop forward in a thunderous manner so that it can achieve its other goals until the complete liberation of Palestine, unquote. Iranians and Palestinians are in very different spheres. They disagree on nearly everything, but Iran wants to be the leader of the Muslim world, and that's why Iran must now become the most public defenders and cheerleaders of the Palestinians to the outside world. That's why they convened an international conference to defend Palestine. The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, also addressed the conference in Tehran. Rouhani said, quote, the occupying regime, in an attempt to normalize its situation, has for the first time referred to certain Arab countries as its allies against the resistance front, instead of describing them as its enemies, unquote. Iran is feeling the pressure. Israel is making headway. Serious relationship building between Israel and her Arab neighbors are developing, mostly as an outgrowth of the rise of ISIS and the increased tensions with Iran. Iran is striking back and telling the Arab world to stop. But will they listen? Gadi Eisenkot, the chief of the IDF staff, the head of the Israeli army, all of the Israeli defense forces, said that Hezbollah is suffering from a crisis of morale. Eisenkot made his point while addressing the Knesset Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defense. He said that Hezbollah leaders' statements about shooting rockets and hitting the ammonia plant in Haifa, as well as the nuclear power plant in Dimona, are an exaggeration. He said that hits of that type are way beyond the capabilities of Hezbollah. The Israeli top general said that the civil war in Syria has enabled Hezbollah. It has given them important operational experience as fighters and tactical warriors battling ISIS and others in Syria. Eisenkot said, though, that Hamas in Gaza has been Israel's largest border threat. He said that the IDF has spent $2.4 billion in creating a response against tunnels and other border threats along the Israeli-Gaza border. He said that the new leader of Hamas has changed the public attitude, but not tactical decisions on whether or not to attack Israel. All in all, Eisenkot delivered a positive message. He's optimistic about the state of Israel's safety and optimistic that Israel's enemies are still a safe distance away. Authorities in Gaza announced that 3 of their workers were killed in the tunnel that the Egyptians blew up the day before. 3 workers who went into the tunnel to repair the destructions were killed by inhaling poisonous gas that was in the tunnel as a result of the blast of blowing it up. The information was made public by the Hamas Interior Ministry. The important element in this story is that Egypt is destroying Hamas tunnels to make certain that they are not used for terror or to transport illegal weapons. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that Jesus is a name and Christ is a title or description? I will always refer to Jesus by his historical name. He was a historical personality. The name Jesus is very common, let's say, in Spanish-speaking countries because it refers to the person, not the deity. The words Christos and Christus in Latin and Greek both mean Savior. So Christ is the title, and it describes Jesus. Jesus is the transposition of the Hebrew and Aramaic name Yehoshua. In the Galilee during the time of Jesus, their local accent often dropped the second syllable in the word if it was the Hebrew letter He. In addition, the last sound of the word was also often dropped, truncating the word, and in this case, the name. So Jesus, his name, was pronounced in local Galilean Hebrew and Aramaic as Yeshu. That is the direct way the Talmud refers to Jesus, as Yeshu. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.